Welcome back to the Lincoln Project. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Well, gang, this is just a short visit today. I wanted to bring up a couple of things I saw over the weekend, and we're just now, as you're listening to this or watching this, we'll be anxiously awaiting the results of the New Hampshire primary. I wanted to say one thing about Ron DeSantis dropping out of the presidential race. I'm not surprised at all by this. I always thought he was a terrible candidate. I thought he had a terrible organization, and his reason for running didn't seem to make sense to me, other than the fact that he was younger and nastier than Trump, at least in the way he spoke, but not in the way that he could communicate politically. We saw that this was a guy who wasn't very good on the stump. He was driven by ambition rather than service. For all of his takes on abortion and Disney and, LGBT rights, right? This is a guy who is the product of the elite institutions that so many conservatives decry. So again, it always seemed to me that for a lot of the big donor class and that sort of 15 to 20% of people that just stuck with him the whole way, he was like a less embarrassing version of Trump, that you could take him to a country club and, he knew maybe what fork to use. But the truth is, I think he's a more embarrassing version of Trump. But I will say that the one thing, and I mentioned this on the episode with Trippy last week, was that the majority of people who stuck with him in Iowa were the people who considered themselves to be, a one-issue, single-issue voter on abortion. And so I think that does represent a real danger for Trump, even though DeSantis has endorsed him. Yet another sign of weakness, that this guy was willing to attack him all so gently and then finally, get in line. Not a surprise. His campaign wasn't going to go anywhere. But I think that group of people who stuck with him, whether they were donors or true evangelical voters, if they don't come back to Trump, they represent a real problem for him in the fall, for Trump in the fall, that is, because Trump can't afford to lose any voters. He's got a very low ceiling of 90+% white voters. The majority of his turnout operation will be based around evangelical churches. And so any weakness in that part of his coalition, such as it is, represents a lot of trouble for him. Let's talk about New Hampshire. I think it was interesting this week, or over the weekend, I should say, that Nikki Haley started going after Donald Trump about his cognitive disabilities. And I think it's interesting to see, too, that the media has now started picking up on this. And I think this is one thing that we've been talking a lot about here at the Lincoln Project, guys, was this level of disbelief or, sleepwalking about Donald Trump and what he represents. I think now he's back out in the field. He's at rallies. He's, participating in elections. The media is seeing him up close and personal. And now he has not guys like us and gals like us or Democrats talking about his inability to understand whether it's Nikki Haley or Nancy Pelosi. But now the media is seeing it up close and personal, too. So they are now writing about it. And this is another big problem for Trump, because his whole thing is, I'm vigorous, I'm strong, Joe Biden isn't. Well, it turns out that he's not vigorous. He's not strong. He has no idea what's going on around him based on, his various physical ailments, either the way he looks or the way he shuffles down a hallway or whatever's going on with his hand. This is a guy who's not healthy. If you live on nothing but Diet Coke and processed foods, it's eventually biology will catch up with you. And appears, that between his insane, malignant narcissism, his age, and his diet, all of those things seem to be compounding. In New Hampshire, it looks in these late surveys like Trump is pulling ahead of Haley. That might be the case. If he wins, I won't be surprised. If it's close, I won't be surprised. But here's what I think we should look forward to, guys, is that if it's anywhere near close, and I'm going to say anywhere 10 points or less that Trump beats Haley by, let's say 55-45, somewhere in that neighborhood, he is going to lose his mind. Now, you say, Reed, how can you tell? We're going to see it. You've already seen what he's doing to Haley. He's calling her Nimrata, or he's getting her name wrong, or he's saying, I don't know where she's from, right? So he's already appealing to the Christian nationalist, racist base of the Republican Party that will ultimately carry him to the nomination. But as he does this, again, let's look forward deeper into the general. All of those Haley voters who might have seen someone that says, okay, this is someone of the Mitt Romney cast or the John McCain cast or the George W. Bush cast. What they're saying is like, I like her because she's a Republican I can relate to, but I don't want anything to do with him. And again, going back to those Iowa numbers, nearly half of people who self-identified as Haley voters said they'd vote for Biden. That is a huge thing. That is a huge thing. That's like saying in Monopoly, do not cross go, do not collect $200. I'm going straight to the other side of the aisle. Guys, if it's not unprecedented, it's close to unprecedented. And so I think that what you're going to see in this month between New Hampshire and South Carolina, again, if Haley keeps it close, is going to be a really brutal and awful attack from the Trump forces, from the MAGA forces on Nikki Haley as she attempts to get to her home state to stake one last flag in the ground to say, this is where I can, I'm going to ultimately win or lose the nomination. Now, let me just say this. This is not because I have any personal love for Nikki Haley. I think she is not that great a candidate, and I don't think she's that good a person. And I do think that she will ultimately get in line behind Donald Trump. But guys, let's look at this in the big picture. The longer she can drag this out, the longer that she can make it a race, the longer she will have the ability to push Trump further and further away from normal human beings. And this is one thing that we at the Lincoln Project guys have learned over the past few years, is that once you cross away from Trump, right, very few people cross back. It's not a two-way street, really. If you leave Donald Trump either to say, I'm going to stay home, I'm not going to vote for him anymore, or yes, I have now made the determination that maybe I'm not a Democrat, but Joe Biden is a much better choice, very rarely does anybody go back in the other direction. And so I think this next 30 days after New Hampshire, leading up to South Carolina, guys, it's going to be pivotal. And I think that's the time when a lot of the stakes of this race are going to be made plain. A lot of the illustration of what Trump really represents for the future of this country are going to become clear. And I think it will be incumbent upon all of us, not only us here at the Lincoln Project, but all of you watching and listening, to make sure that we understand what roles we each have to play, where we can participate best in our states, in our communities. If you live in a place where you can make phone calls or send texts into a target state, find those groups. Go to jointheunion.us. We have not only our own grassroots organization, but we also have 100 partner organizations. I guarantee you some of them are in the states that you live in. Guys, something has changed in the last week since Iowa. And I think the country, the pro-democracy forces, and individual decent Americans are waking up to what they knew was coming but didn't want to believe it. Trump is back, and we have the ability, guys, to not only beat him, but to beat him badly. I feel as good today as I have felt in probably a couple of months, and it's because what we always felt to be true would be true. When Trump is back front and center, which he can't help himself but be, Americans say, I don't want that anymore. All right, guys, that's it. I'll be back later this week with a recap of New Hampshire and some other great guests. I want to say, as always, thanks to everybody for listening. If you can, go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Share the Lincoln Project and this podcast with your friends and neighbors. Until then, guys, you can find me on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen_LP, on TikTok and X at Reed Galen, and on Substack at The Homefront. I hope you'll check it out, guys. Until then, thanks for everything, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again to everyone for listening. Be sure to follow and subscribe to The Lincoln Project on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or however you listen. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review. To connect with us, follow us on Twitter at Project Lincoln, and for more information on our movement, to join our mailing list, subscribe to our newsletter, or make a contribution to our efforts, visit lincolnproject.us. If you want to message the podcast directly, please send an email to podcast@lincolnproject.us. And if you want to personally join the fight to save our nation's democracy, visit jointheunion.us. For the Lincoln Project, I'm Reed Galen. I'll see you on the next episode.